continually updated. Ancient God, know yet old gods, know yet righteousness, Father of peace, also known as God of war and peace. The holy emblem is a white dove, with light grey wings. Mr. Liming, also known as God of light and shadow, his holy emblem is a notched ring, brass in color. The old man with the lamp, also known as God of the sun and the earth, his holy emblem is the sun pattern, golden yellow. Ms. Creation, also known as God of creation and destruction, her holy emblem is a wrench, silver in color. Lord of all things, also known as God of nature and evil thoughts, his holy emblem is two overlapping leaves, one withered yellow and one green. Do you remember what I said? Finally regaining consciousness in a trance, Syada looked at everything in front of him with some confusion. In the last second of memory, he was helping his friend with the funeral, and in the next second of memory, he came here. It's a bedroom, definitely not a 21st century bedroom. The bright yellow light in the room is not very strong, and some blackened wooden floors are clean, but the walls are already a little yellowed. There was a stack of books piled up in the corner, crooked as if they were about to fall, and there were some metal jugs and photo frames on the bookshelf next to the pile of books. Those photos were all in black and white. In addition to oil paintings, there are two metal pipes on the wall. It can be vaguely seen that the buckle of the pipe connection has rusted, and one of the thinner pipes branched out from the desk. And the brown wooden desk is full of papers, and the drawers on both sides are half opened, and the documents and papers inside can be seen. On the desk lamp connected to the brass-colored pipe is still shining, and the style of the horn of the thick desk lamp is very novel. Hey? Not electric lights? Gas lights. It is difficult to tell whether it is a gas lamp by observation, but the pipes that are attached to the wall and the wall lights connected to the pipes cannot be electric lights. The warm yellow light was not bright, and it could only illuminate the desk area, but somehow it made Syada feel warm. Through this light, he saw the decorative oil paintings on the walls, the black and white single photos on the desk, and the newspapers unfolded in the shadow of the floor. Couldn't read anything in the newspaper, but could see letters instead of squares. This sense of age, no matter where it is, this is no longer my hometown. There was a rotten smell in the air, but more like a funeral home. Syada remembers this taste. After all, just a moment ago, he was still helping his friend who passed away. Do you remember what I said? The voice sounded again, and Syada finally woke up from his trance. The young man reacted quickly and felt that someone was grabbing his right wrist. At this moment, his consciousness and body were completely integrated, so he thought of lowering his head. He was at the bedside of what appeared to be a 19th century men's bedroom, a four-poster bed with curtains on only three sides. The bed body and the visible parts at the head of the bed all shone with a metallic color under the bedside gas lamp. The bedside lamp was lifted by a little angel. Syada was attracted by this exquisite shape for a moment. The person holding his hand was the man lying on the bed. This middle-aged man, who may be the owner of the bedroom, is wearing dark checked pajamas, and everything except his head and right hand is hidden under the quilt. The obvious Caucasian face, but the eyes are sunken, the cheeks are drooping, and the right hand holding Syada's wrist is even more thin and frightening. It looked like a man who was about to be starved to death. Syada even believed that once he spoke a little louder, he had to beg the man not to die. Syada doesn't know anything now, and needs to understand the situation from the man. So, this is time traveled. He thought in his heart that he had a general understanding of the current situation. Fortunately, although the man on the bed was weak, at least there were no corpse spots on his body. Otherwise, Syada would really worry about his current situation. Do you remember what I said? The weak man on the bed asked for the third time. His brown eyes were sunken deep in his sockets, but he was staring at Syada. Although Syada didn't understand why he traveled here inexplicably, at least he knew that it was best to continue acting at this moment, at least understand the current situation, and then make plans for the future. He opened his mouth to speak, only to realize that the other party was not speaking Chinese, nor any language he knew, but Syada could understand it inexplicably. He wanted to answer in the other person's language, but opened his mouth slightly. He could understand but couldn't speak at all. No way? Can you understand but can't speak? There was a buzzing sensation in the ears for a moment, and the back was itchy due to tension. Not being able to speak the language of the inhabitants of another world was not something he could have foreseen, it was the worst possible situation. There was a buzzing sound in his head, and Syada immediately scolded himself in his heart for not being calm enough, and wanted to calm down the panic as soon as possible and find a countermeasure. But then he realized that the voice in his head was not caused by his nervousness at all. He understood the voice in his head, it was a woman talking, it was a murmuring sound. The sixth era, the universal calendar year 1853, summer, the day when the silver moon shines, you came to this world. You understand that you need an identity, so you have to inherit everything from this inexplicable body. Now is the first step, to prove that you can enter this world. Tai. The instinctive reaction is that this is the legendary system, but he immediately realizes that this is definitely not the system. The woman's voice was unusually elegant and soothing, as if reciting a poem in a whisper, which made people intoxicated. But the language she speaks is different from Chinese and the language of the weakened man on the bed. That language is older and more profound, like the breeze of ancient times, passing through the curtain of time, and suddenly blowing to the present. Language itself is a concrete mystery. Even if he only understands the meaning of language, Syada seems to see the deepest darkness. Although Shad understood the second language again, just understanding the language itself made his head buzz, and his new body's stomach also had a nauseating reaction. This is mental oppression, and the language spoken by the voice in your head has extraordinary power in itself. This is the language of this world. What's in the head is not a system, it's something that exists in the body. Syada made a judgment, and at the same time his pupils narrowed slightly, a more terrifying guess came out of it. The new world, this suspected Victorian steam age world, is a world of extraordinary and mysterious existence. He is not the kind of person who does not accept the status quo. Since time travel has appeared, the existence of transcendence is not completely unacceptable. It's just that the first task now is to figure out the current situation, answer the man's question, and figure out his identity. So, Syada tried his best to use his own language to convey information to the voice in his head. Whoever you are, please listen. I want to accept everything about this body, but I have no memory of this body, no language habits of this body. Now, you have it. It was as if a brick had been forced into the Tianling cap and stirred maliciously a few times. Shad thought it a miracle he hadn't passed out. He didn't get the memory of his original body, but was forced into some knowledge about Kingdom of Delarion, the common language of humans in the Northern Kingdom. But this knowledge just exists, like a translation machine. He can't master it immediately and understand all slang, dialects, religious culture, allusions, or language habits. Sorry sir, I'm in a bad state, can you repeat what you reminded me to remember? Relying on this knowledge, he intermittently translated Chinese into the northern human common language of the other world in his mind, and then deliberately spoke it in the translator's accent. The weakened man holding Syada's hand suddenly exerted force. Yu reading www.yuuganshu.com. It's hard to imagine such a thin wrist with such power. You're still like this, your brain is not working well, I'll say it again. It seemed that the original owner of the body had a bad head, and Syada's words did not arouse suspicion for the time being. Shade. The names are pronounced alike. I was going to die. I knew I was going to die 3 months in advance, so I chose you from among the homeless. Changed your life, gave you a new name, made you easy to read and understand some common sense. And when I died in the end, you will have everything from me, my detective agency, all my property. But you need to do one thing for me, a very simple thing. Although his tone was very weak, his terrifying eyes stared at Syada like a dying lone wolf. Syada kept his breathing as steady as possible, but did not meet his eyes bravely. It's not that Syada is afraid at the moment, but from the sentence just now, he has a preliminary understanding of the situation of the original owner of the body. Therefore, at this time, he should definitely not look at the man, but should look away in fear, which is in line with the known character settings. Inherit my detective agency, and whatever you do with it, at least keep it open. Until 3 months later, September 5, 1853, when you will receive a letter to take it back, burn it, and that's the price you pay for my entire inheritance. His hand tightly held Syada's. Even though Syada pretended to be struggling slightly according to his acting skills, he didn't think he could break free at all. The strength of the other party was really great. This is the only request that I, Sparrow Hamilton, leave the legacy to you, Shad Hamilton. This kind of last words and demands, you can tell something is wrong as soon as you hear it. Syada, whose hand was being held by the bed, didn't have much expression on his face. But he knew clearly that the detective had accurately predicted death, and took in the homeless man with a bad head before he died, and even left all his property, just for a simple-sounding request. Well, this simple request is definitely not simple. The other party may not only be a detective, but Syada who occupies the new body is not the original guy. Even if Syada didn't know the truth in the past, the foreigner now understands that he shouldn't easily get involved in things that he knows are wrong when he hears them, otherwise. If you don't, I guarantee you that when I die, you won't get a single penny of mine, and nothing here will belong to you. You'll be again, with no gas lamps, no fireplaces, and no day 3 meals, not even a bed, and you'll be back to your old life. But Syada had to agree that he had nothing in this world. Compared with becoming a homeless man and working hard from scratch, getting involved in a troublesome thing but gaining property, Syada knew that both options were bad, but he had to choose one. Besides, if you have already stood here and heard these words, you have already participated, so it is impossible to quit. Syada knows how to assess the situation and how to measure his own situation. It's just, is the death of Mr. Sparrow Hamilton related to the extraordinary? Is it related to the voice in my head? He thought to himself, but couldn't draw any further conclusions, but he didn't expect the voice in his head to appear at this moment, related to Ko Fan, he died because of a relic. This has nothing to do with you. That voice is still so elegant, so calm. Even though the amount of information is very short, the whispering voice still seems to be reciting poems. Relic. It's a proper noun in the elegant old language spoken by women. Different languages have different information content, but in the language used by women, this proprietary vocabulary has a huge amount of information, with meanings such as sealed object, contained object and cursed object. Syada was very fortunate that he could understand this language, and he read out the meaning of special items, which can exercise extraordinary power, but are extremely dangerous from the vocabulary. This made Syada have a rather bad guess about the world. So, who are you? The voice did not explain the term, so Syada asked in his heart. From the other party's answers to their own questions, they understand that the other party is also an individual who can think. I am you. The whispering voice answered softly, like the wind caressing the heart. But Syada snorted softly. He was sure that this body was male, and the voice in his head would not be the original owner. Looking at the light of the bedside lamp illuminating the wrinkled and inactive skin of the man on the bed, Syada said to him, I see, sir. Syada, I still have 10 minutes to live. If you have any questions, let's ask together. The other party said a lot of words, and his tone was full of fatigue. But Syada knows that if the other party is completely correct, then the next question will become the key to his foothold in this world, and he must be cautious. Your death doesn't seem normal. Pretending to speak slowly and pretending to be out of his wits is quite a laborious way of speaking. The first question is about his own situation after the death of the other party. Syada must make sure that he will be implicated in the cause of the detective's death. We did not talk about this in the past. I also know that you have been worried, don't worry about this. My death in a while may scare you, but don't worry. My death will not involve you, I need you to complete the task in 3 months, so I can guarantee this. The person who killed me will never appear again. After all, we ordinary people are not worthy of the other party's attention. The amount of information obtained was good, and the man on the bed didn't intend to hide anything. Ordinary people. Syada was really hesitant this time. You don't need to know, in fact, even I don't know much. Those ring magicians, mystics who exercise the 4 elements of miracle, enlightenment, blasphemy, whispering, the 5 Orthodox churches and the 3 thaumaturgy academies. Forget what I just said, and you'll be better off. Remember, you don't understand anything. The man on the bed tried his best to emphasize that Syada could only memorize these nouns, then nodded, okay, I don't understand anything. He guessed that Ring Warlock is the title of extraordinary people in this world, and miracle, enlightenment, blasphemy, and whispering are a part of the power system, and the Orthodox Church and Thaumaturgy Academy are the main forces of extraordinary people. It is impossible for an ordinary detective to know so much. Detective Hamilton really has a lot of secrets. But Syada did not continue to ask about this topic. He had to let the other party willingly tell more information within a limited time, instead of trying to find out lies and truths with mutual suspicion. After you die, how am I going to live? I don't know much about detectives, and I can't read much. Even though time is tight, he can't speak faster. Not only because of the disguise, but also because Shad has not yet mastered the language. The fact that he can only walk while running makes him quite anxious. But he couldn't show anxiety, so he was even more anxious. It doesn't matter, it's enough to follow what I taught you. You only need to stay here for 3 months. After 3 months, sell all your things and go to live in the countryside. There is more suitable for you, and it is enough for you to live your life safely. After all, the prices are lower. Probably because he was really exhausted, the man on the bed didn't say a more complete sentence. But Syada had no memory of the past at all, and didn't know what the other party had taught him. He asked for help from the voice in his head, but the voice didn't appear. Is there anything else you need to tell me? Syada asked the question for the 3rd time, and this question was only uttered after careful consideration. Remember what I told you in the past 3 months. Remember the simple commission I left in the memo. You can try to do it to maintain the operation of the detective agency, and the cards in this diary. The weak man pointed to the head of the bed. He let go of Syada's hand, and Syada bent down to pick up the diary. Brown leather cover, fastened with a magnetic snap. This diary is well protected by the user. Shad handed the diary to Mr. Hamilton on the bed, but the latter shook his head, almost speechless. So Syada opened the diary by himself, and flipped through it roughly. Each page was a different continuous date, and both the front and back were in use. Most of the pages have only one sentence, nothing to do today, not much deposit, while a small part records the progress of the commission received by the firm. Flipping to the middle of the diary, the flipping of the pages stopped, and a hard card was stuck there. Syada controlled not to raise his eyebrows, seeing that it was a rectangular card that was less than the size of his palm. After taking it out, it feels like there is a layer of completely transparent wax on the surface of the card, which protects the card itself from environmental damage. The cards are not thick and can be seen by the light in the room. The reverse side that Syada thinks is the abstract pattern of the sun, the moon, and the stars, which are superimposed together to form a strange combination. The front side that Syada thinks is a painting of a person who turned his head and couldn't see everything clearly, sitting sideways on a high stool above, the lady with the moon in her hand. Silver hair, with a smile outlined on the profile, wearing a long robe. But the color of the playing cards is not rich enough, only white, black and cool tones near the 2 colors. The upper right corner of the front is marked with the number 3, and the upper left corner is a small sign of the sun. Between the two, that is, in the center of the front of the card, a black vertical line is drawn in a white circle. Directly below the woman's picture, that is, below the front, there is a little blank space, and there is a line of small characters written there. When using this card, the number can be adjusted within the range of 1 to 5. The cards don't look very new. Looking from the side against the weak light in the room, you can see the imperceptible damage, but it can also be seen that the owner is working hard to preserve it carefully. Syada actually completely understood the words on the cards, just like he could understand men and women. It's really strange. After traveling, I can understand, but I can't speak. Thinking in his heart, he asked in a low voice, "What's this?" Very valuable cards, which are in common with the common set of 54 cards we usually use, are the cards representing Sun 3 among the 4 suits of sun, moon, stars, and flowers. But this card is a special issue. Yes, the pattern is rare, and UU reading www.uuganshu.com is very valuable for collection. Keep it in a diary, don't get wet or fold it in half, and don't show it to others easily, but if you really have nowhere to go to Tobesk, the Birmingham collection, where people know its value. Rhodes, the most important collection of my life. Syada nodded, wrote down the term Lord's card, and understood that this is a relatively common card game in this world, and that Sun 3 is of the same nature as commemorative coins and commemorative stamps. So I put the card back into the diary. Although this card is a bit more refined, it can be inferred from the productivity of the times judged from the decoration of the bedroom that this world can make such things, so there is no need to have too much suspicion. "Sir, do you have anything else to say?" Syada asked again. Now it is better to let the other party take the initiative to speak than to ask the question himself. "Shad." Mr. Hamilton held Shad's hand again, and looked at the young man beside the bed with softer eyes. "I know that I have never been a good person, but I am really sorry for involving you. After 3 months, just leave Tobesk. This kind of capital city is not suitable for you. But I think, if you can understand, you will also think that I did the right thing in taking you out of your homeless life. Your brain is not working well, remember, don't easily believe what other people say in the future, especially don't easily believe the words of the guy who tries to make you pay. I have contacted Tobesk Public Cemetery and selected up the tomb. The corpse carrier will come in a moment, you don't have to follow. In this house, live for 3 months according to the life skills I have taught you. Shad, I'm sorry, good luck." After explaining his funeral, the detective on the bed closed his eyes. Syada pursed his lips and waited for a while, then broke his hands free, and tested his breath and pulse. Died. He couldn't believe that the other party died so easily, and it really took almost 10 minutes. Before he had time to react, a black light suddenly flashed across the corpse's face. Syada didn't see what the light was at all, it scattered in the air and disappeared. And as the light disappeared from the corpse, the emaciated corpse that looked like it had been starved to death gradually became fuller. Detective Hamilton's body gradually returned to normal until it turned into a normal corpse. How is this normal? What is the situation now? In the silence of the room, Syada looked around with some anxiety. The anxiety was not being alone with the corpse, but the anxiety of being in a strange environment. The woman's voice in his mind sounded again, as if reminding Syada that this is not a person. "You have come into contact with whispers." "What contact? What whisper? Can you elaborate?" But the voice still did not give an answer. Whispering is one of the 4 extraordinary elements mentioned by the detective just now. Obviously, the so-called relic and whispering are the truth that led to his death. But this truth is too shallow, and Syada can't learn more. Looking at the corpse on the bed, unexpectedly, there was not much panic. At this moment, Syada really hoped that this was acting, but he knew that it could not be acting. Standing by the bed in silence for a while, I walked around the four-poster bed to the window as quietly as possible, and carefully opened the heavy curtains. Immediately, the faint morning sun shone through the fog on the street and the glass on the window shined in. It's morning. Because of the heavy fabric curtains, he thought it was night. Bang bang bang, the sound of knocking on the door suddenly sounded at this moment, startling Xiade. He subconsciously let go of the curtain, but immediately held it and then pulled it completely open. The street was outside this window, and I didn't have time to look at the steam age scenery in the fog. I first looked down and made sure that the person who knocked on the door was a corpse transporter. I could see the carriage pulling the corpse, and then I turned to open the door. Being able to know exactly the time of my death is why the contacted corpse transporter can arrive so accurately, he said in his heart, and pushed open the bedroom door. Outside is the living room, which also has metal pipes that seem to be gas pipes climbing on the wall, solid wood furniture and various piles of books and documents, a small blackboard hanging on the wall, a very formal combination of coffee table and fabric sofa, which also looks like a detective office style. The living room did not draw the curtains, and the morning light shone in, and the light slanted on the floor in front of Shad's feet. In the light, floating dust fluttered quietly, all of which made Xiade, who came out of the dim room, feel as if he had passed away. Open the latch and anti-theft chain of the door. Directly opposite is the spiral downward staircase, and there is another door next door, that is to say, there are two residences on this floor, somewhat like an apartment building in a Sherlock Holmes novel. Circling down the stairs, from the second floor to the first floor, the stairs lead directly to the foyer. On one side of the hall, the passage connecting the first floor is completely blocked by wooden boards, and only the hall is available on the entire first floor. So, there won't be any housekeeper-style landlady. But why seal the first floor? He passed the shoe cabinet, picked up the fallen umbrella, glanced at the gas lamp on the wall above the shoe cabinet, and opened the door with the light. A silent old man in a black coat stood at the door, with the sign of overlapping leaves hanging on his chest. The old man raised his eyes and glanced at Xiade, Shard Hamilton. He speaks the same language as the dead detective, the so-called Delarian. Yes. Xiade nodded cautiously, motioning for the old man to follow him upstairs. So the old man greeted the dispirited middle-aged man who was calming the horse behind him, and the three of them walked up the stairs together. Xiade didn't know what to say, so he led them silently to the bedroom on the second floor with the room number 1. The old man and the middle-aged man first confirmed that Detective Hamilton on the bed was really dead, and then handed Shad a document for his signature. It was a confirmation document confirming that the corpse had been handed over to the City Public Cemetery Management Office, and below it were the double official seals of the City Public Cemetery Management Office and the City Funeral Committee. The old man and the middle-aged man checked the condition of the corpse, and Xiade sat at the desk in the bedroom and picked up a pen. At this time, he realized that he could understand, but he couldn't write. Fortunately, the knowledge I just received not only has the ability to speak, but also the ability to write. After translating the name into the similar-sounding Northern Common Language of Humanity, Delarian, he intends to sign his name. The content of the document is not noteworthy, and it is probably to confirm the handover of the body and the payment of the money for the entrusted funeral. This is a type standard document, and typewriters with mechanical gear structures probably existed in this era. But judging from the other signature of the document belonging to the committee secretariat, the name of this world is very similar to the West in the previous life. It is divided into 3 parts. The official document must add the middle name. The first name is Shad, and the last name can follow Hamilton, but with a middle name. He didn't know for a while whether the dead Mr. Hamilton had given the original owner of the body a middle name. But now is not the time to rummage through the room, you must immediately come up with a name to deal with temporarily. Suellen. The whispering voice sounded again in my mind, and the voice gave a word. This word exists in both the ancient language used by women and the common language of the Northern Kingdom used by detectives, and its meaning is silver moon. I can use this as my middle name, but you have to explain. Syada tried to communicate again, and the voice of the woman reciting the poem really sounded, "This is destiny, stranger, the silver moon is your destiny. When you gather all four elements and push open the door of the extraordinary, the meaning will naturally appear." Frowning, Syada thought for a while and signed his name, Shade Suellen Hamilton. The corpse transporter did not ask Shad to give the death certificate, or the cause of death report, let alone notify the police of the autopsy. After getting back the authorization letter for corpse handover from Shad, he gave him a receipt with the location of the tomb, and then silently removed Mr. Hamilton's body in pajamas. Syada sent them to the door downstairs, but he didn't go out by himself. Seeing the corpse being put into the coffin in the carriage, the middle-aged man drove the carriage, carrying the coffin and the old man, and left here together. "Well then, goodbye, Mr. Sparrow Hamilton." Thinking silently in his heart, after closing the door, Syada stood in the hallway for a while before going upstairs again. The pace of the outsider is a bit heavy, but there is no one else around, but there is an inexplicable sense of relief. It's simpler than I thought. I didn't ask Mr. Hamilton's cause of death. I didn't even care whether I was Shade Hamilton. I didn't even ask for a tip for moving the body. This world is simple, or Mr. Hamilton has already got everything in order. The corpse left here with many secrets, and this place temporarily belonged to Syada, a despicable foreigner who occupied someone else's body. In fact, he still has a lot of questions, and he wants to ask Mr. Hamilton, and there are countless questions waiting to be answered. But people cannot be resurrected after death. He must accept the fact that the other party died, and work hard to gain a foothold in this world. The only good news is that the house on the second floor that used to belong to Mr. Sparrow Hamilton now belongs to Shad, and he immediately became a house owner in this different world that resembled the Victorian era in the mid-19th century. The first floor was sealed with wooden boards, the room next to number 2 on the second floor was locked from the outside, and the staircase leading to the third floor was completely broken. Therefore, Syada is the only one left in this house at this moment. He returned to the room with house number 1 on the second floor, carefully checked the study, living room, bathroom, and bedroom, and after confirming that no one was there, he let out a sigh of relief and sat on the sofa in the living room full of sunlight, crooked, looking down at the morning mist outside the window. Of course, that's not natural fog, that's smog. Syada finally had time to sort out the current situation. I traveled through time and inherited a detective firm. The original owner of the body may have a problem with his head, and he was trained by the former detective to help him complete a seemingly simple task after his death. Sparrow Hamilton Detective, there are definitely secrets. There are extraordinary powers in this world. The death of the detective and the voice in my head both prove this, and what I need is to gather the 4 elements. The death of the detective has already brought me into contact with Whispers. Rubbed his face, but at least the current situation is not bad. Despite the sudden death of Mr. Sparrow Hamilton, there are many things Shad has yet to figure out. But at least, Shad has a foothold in the new world. This is enough to support him to live, to explore the secrets of this world, and maybe find a way back home. Syada is not a person who goes with the situation, but he is not a person who complains about everything. It is unfortunate that he left his hometown inexplicably and came here. All he can do for the time being is to accept it, live a good life, and try to live a better life. By the way, let's go and see this extraordinary world, the mystery of the Steam Age, those secret rituals and spells. How can you be willing to be ordinary? Syada sighed softly, and the woman's laughter sounded in his mind, as pleasant as the breeze blowing through the lavender field. Now that we have a short-term goal, the current plan is to inspect the room, search for coins, search for city maps, and search for books. Learn about the world through written materials, and then make plans for the future. Whether you want to stay for 3 months, help the detective finish that matter, and make plans after investigating the specific situation. Syada summed up the current situation and accepted the fact that the detective was dead. The worst situation at present is actually that there is no memory of the original owner, so he has no understanding of this world. Other than that, the status quo is pretty good. Standing up, Shad walked towards the bathroom. Looking at the person in the mirror, he has dull blonde hair, brown and black eyes, and the face of a male of obvious Western race. He is about 20 years old, with a flat expression and no mood, and his height is around 1.8 meters. After all, he was a homeless man before, so his appearance is not particularly outstanding, but in Syada's own aesthetics, it can be regarded as not bad. "This is me, don't be scared when you look in the mirror in the future," he said to himself in his heart, but he didn't leave the mirror immediately, but looked around cautiously, and then called softly, "Hi, hello, are you still there?" He tried to communicate with the whispering female voice again to determine what it was. But there was no result for a long time, so I could only accept the reality and give up temporarily. The next step is to look for coins. When I searched the kitchen just now, I didn't find any food, and this body is obviously hungry, so I need to withdraw money to eat. But the accident happened again. About half an hour later, Syada sat back on the sofa drenched in the morning light, with an inexplicable panic on his face. In his hand, he held a banknote with the number 10 written on it and many creases, smaller than the cards in the diary. The number side has a portrait of the character, and the reverse side is the coat of arms of the royal family of King Delarayan where it is currently located. After searching the whole house, rummaging through all the books and documents, and digging out all the pockets in the closet, Syada actually only found this banknote that seemed to have slipped in accidentally in the gap behind the bookshelf. Could it be that the prices in this world are special, and this banknote can keep me alive for 3 months? Syada comforted himself in horror, but no matter how he thought about it, he knew it was impossible. This is a disaster. He leaned back slightly, let himself lean on the soft sofa back, closed his eyes and looked up, looking at the white ceiling. "Mr. Hamilton, where did you hide the money? I promised to stay, so you can't leave me a penny." At this moment, he really wanted to catch up with the carriage pulling the coffin, shake the man in the coffin awake and question him. If you don't understand the language, you can survive if you are smart, if you are physically disabled, as long as you live bravely, survival is not a problem. But without money, it is completely impossible. Mr. Spike Hamilton apparently didn't cook at home, and there wasn't a single leaf in the kitchen, so there weren't any rats. When Shad's body last ate, he didn't know, but he clearly needed to eat now. Considering the limit of human existence, Syada must immediately find a way to find money, or find a way to make money, otherwise he is likely to be forced to look for restaurants from the map after sunset, and try his luck in the alley outside the restaurant to find garbage bins. "No, I cannot." He looked at the only banknote in his hand with a terrifying expression. "Although I don't know the face value, at least it's money. There are also Sun 3 cards in the diary. These can keep me alive. However, since I can't find money for the time being, I must consider long-term ways to make money. The knowledge of traversers may be very valuable, but realizing knowledge in unfamiliar places is not only troublesome but also dangerous." He thought that this is a detective agency, and Mr. Hamilton seemed to have said before his death that he left some relatively safe tasks, so that Shade, who is not good at using his brain, can maintain his identity as a detective and maintain the detective agency. Since the coin of the dead detective has not been found for the time being, it is necessary to prepare for the worst and consider the means of making a living in the future. That's right, Mr. Hamilton knows that Shade, the original Shade, is not very intelligent, so the tasks left behind must be simple tasks, so as to maintain the operation of the detective agency. So, maybe he has already solved it. For those cases, I just need to come to collect the money. Syada suddenly got inspiration, got up and took the diary from the bedside table in the master bedroom, and found the ledger, memo, and work log from the study. Although no money was found just now, all these things were found. Mr. Sparrow Hamilton is a very organized and rigorous person. Even though Seata has not studied accounting or business administration, he thinks that his records of the firm's operations are very detailed and moving. Of course, Seata was mainly moved, because the unsolved cases of the firm are really very simple, and most of them have been completed. Looking for Miss White's runaway sister, stalking Mr. Lawrence's mistress, looking for the lost orange cat Minia, asking for news of a doctor who can cure an eye disease, all seem simple and not very dangerous. Oh, Mr. Hamilton has already dealt with most of it. If I want to stay and run this place, 2 or 3 weeks to completely solve one thing will be enough for this place to operate. Seata concluded while flipping through Mr. Hamilton's handwritten report. But what he needs now is not to run the detective agency for a long time, but to get a sum of money first to maintain a short-term livelihood. After comparing the difficulty of the remaining 4 tasks, the method of payment and the amount of the reward, Shade decided to solve the commission of following Mr. Lawrence's mistress first. Judging from the case report, Detective Hamilton has been following him for several months, but he stopped following him due to his recent poor health. In fact, the current report can be handed over to the employer to settle the remaining balance. But Mr. Hamilton left a note in the report to take care of Shade's limited literacy, and they were all simple words. The note said that if you intend to complete this commission, it is best to have a recent record before submitting, so that the remuneration may be higher, and the employer will not be suspicious. In other words, Seata only needs to follow up once more to complete the commission. Although this is not a perfect completion, it at least meets the requirements of the employer, that is, Mr. Lawrence's wife, and is enough to get the balance of the entrusted payment marked £1.7, which is £1.4. Make. Judging by the tone of detectives' notes, that's a pretty solid paycheck. In addition to the reason for choosing this commission, it is also because of this kind of commission to help his wife catch a mistress. Detective Hamilton has handled many cases. It is the simplest commission, and there will be no mistakes in the final handover. Sparrow Hamilton is not a well-known detective, but he is very good at handling extramarital affairs investigations. Seata didn't want to stay in the house of the newly dead person to drink cold water and eat paper to satisfy his hunger, so he prepared to set off to investigate and try to submit the report to the employer before dusk. No problem, pass this commission first, get the first sum of money, then slowly explore the secrets of the dead detective, figure out the source of the voice in your head, everything will be fine. He encouraged himself in his heart, first found the city map, and based on Detective Hamilton's report, combined with the calendar on the wall, he deduced where the mistress named Mrs. LaSoya might appear. These are simple tasks, but the most difficult step is to find the current location in the Tobesk city map. There are many notes on the firm's map of Tobesk, left by the former detective, and even marked the location of the tavern that he often used to sniff out information, as well as the black market where sensitive items were traded. But the original Mr. Detective did not have the habit of marking his own home on the map. Fortunately, when Seata searched for the information, he found a past tracking record, which contained the action route of that operation, so it was confirmed that the location of this apartment is located in the San Teresa Square in the center of Tobesk City. Number 6. Thanks to Mr. Sparrow Hamilton for his detailed records. This is a house next to the square in the city center. Hey? How much should this kind of house be worth? Shad said with emotion, and at the same time, he found a palace complex called Yordle Palace just 2 streets away from St. Teresa Square. Judging from the newspaper, on the second page between the front page the third round of steam pipeline renovation in the city and the third page investigation report on the collapse of ancient towers on Mount Karas, the Yordle Palace was mentioned. It is the residence of the royal family of King Delarayan. Seata, who had no house in the original world, suddenly accelerated his heartbeat. He looked at the document in his hand and muttered to himself, in other words, reading www.uyuganshu.com. Where I am now is the capital city of the Kingdom of Delarayan, one of the 2 world kingdoms, and it is an apartment next to the downtown square. I actually have such a house, and I still have to worry about being starved to death. Ha, life in another world may be simpler than I thought. The depressed mood from just now was suddenly relieved, but the house could not be realized immediately, and Syada did not really intend to give up on Mr. Hamilton's 3-month entrustment. At least stand on your feet before thinking about it. But at least there was a very sincere smile on his face. With a house in this location, you don't have to worry about it in the future. The smile on his face gradually disappeared. Syada realized that he had even found the will just now, but he didn't find anything like land deeds and house deeds. This apartment is not rented, is it? The more I thought about it, the more possible it was. If I could afford a house in this location, I wouldn't need to open a detective agency, and collecting rent would be enough to support myself. Even if the original business of the detective was not just for making money, judging from the interior decoration, this didn't look like the house that belonged to Detective Hamilton himself. In other words, it is very likely that I will also have to pay an unknown amount of rent every month. Syada came to this conclusion inconceivably, and at the same time looked at the calendar hanging on the wall of the living room again. It is the sunny moon of 1853, which is the third Saturday of June. If you really have to pay the rent, it is very likely that you will pay at the beginning of each month. Hey? This world also has a December system, and the dates of each month are very similar to before. Otherwise, I'd better run, pack clothes, pull suitcases, and run with buckets. Staying here not only has no income, but Mr. Hamilton may have left debts that I don't know about. Of course, Syada didn't run away in the end. The 3-month mission left by Mr. Hamilton, no matter how you think about it, you know something is wrong, and Shade, who has been involved in it, since he did not leave before his death, it is even more impossible to leave now. But investigating that mission, and probing Hamilton's secrets, was a matter for the future. The key now is to get enough money to survive for a week before making other plans. Take the survey report and map, and don't forget the compass and pocket watch in the drawer of the desk. For safety reasons, although no firearms were found, a cane can also be used as a weapon. Of course, don't forget to bring a fruit knife. For clothes, I chose a humble black button-up coat and trousers, which is very in line with the dressing habits of Tobesk, which has just entered summer. Room 1 on the second floor has a total of 2 bedrooms, and Syada found clothes suitable for his current figure in the other room. It's a pity that the room suspected to belong to the original owner Syada didn't have a diary or anything like that, nor did he have any hints written by Syada with his pathetic literacy, otherwise life would be easier. After doing all this, the clock in the corner of the living room is almost 11 o'clock in the morning. Syada found the keys to the door and the downstairs door in the bowl in the cupboard at the door of the room. Carefully locked the door, took a deep breath, gritted his teeth and pulled a hair from his head. Lie down on the floor between the door and the stairs, put the hair in the crack under the door, squint your left eye, and confirm that the hair is facing the bulge on the left corner of the bedroom door facing the room. The windows in the stairwell are closed, and the first floor is also blocked. All the windows in the room are closed, so you don't have to worry about your hair being moved by the wind. As long as Syada came back, don't stride at the door, and be careful when opening the door on the first floor. The position of the hair will indicate whether someone passes by or enters the room. He wanted to stand up, but he looked at the locked door of room 2 on the second floor next door. So after thinking about it, he reluctantly pulled out another hair and pinned it in the crack of the door, parallel to the position of the lock. Because Mr. Hamilton has left too many secrets, it is always good to be cautious. Circling down the stairs, the sound of trampling in the quiet space made Syada panic for some reason. There was no dust on the banisters and the decorative oil paintings on the walls looked like they had been wiped down frequently. The closer he got downstairs, the more Syada felt his heart beating faster. He understands that there is nothing to be nervous about, but after all, this is the first step here, to truly step into this world. Standing in front of the door, he changed his boots, then grabbed the black round hat on the vertical coat hanger and put it on his head. It took him a long time to hold the doorknob and push the door open. The heartbeat became faster the moment the door was opened. This feeling of completely entering a strange environment and accepting the fact that I have traveled through it is really uncomfortable. Stepped over the threshold, but did not look out immediately, but quickly walked out with his head down, then turned around and turned the key to lock the door. Closing his eyes, he slowly turned to face the street, leaned back against the door, and pressed his head against the cold metal door plate. No 6. There's nothing to be nervous about, just stepping into a different world. He said to himself, trying to suppress the desire to take a big breath, raised his head, opened his eyes, leaned against the door, and looked at everything in front of him. There was some smoke in the air, and the weather was a bit gloomy compared to the morning. But the noisy square is still full of people, gentlemen in formal suits and top hats, ladies in skirts with powder on their faces, porters carrying wooden boxes, newsboys shouting loudly with bare feet, shy solicitors, flower girls, carriages hurrying past, bloated housewives with paper bags and lace hats. There was a smell of burning in the air, people of all kinds mixed in the streets on the edge of the smoky square. The cries and shouts almost completely overlapped. On the other side of the square in the distance, there are three houses like those behind you. Dense metal pipes cling to the walls like vines or spider webs, shining in the weak midday sun. In the center of the square stood a fountain with a girl holding a water bottle. The fountain did not spray water, but the statue had turned yellow. The patrolling policeman wearing a police badge sitting by the fountain looked at Syada curiously. The middle-aged man asked him if he needed help, and Syada hurriedly looked away. The newspaper boy passed by, and the sound of the soles of his feet rubbing against the gravel-covered ground made his hairs stand on end, the jingling bells of the four-wheeled carriage passing by the door, and the probing sight from the carriage window, let Syada's heart pump blood faster together. Feeling the beating of the heart, he opened his hands and pressed against the door behind him, and instinctively leaned back, terrified by everything that was real in front of him. The blood pressure surged, the heartbeat accelerated, and the sudden sound of a bell in the distance, almost like a bomb exploding in his head, made Syada almost faint. So real, so unbelievable, so contrary to the common sense of the past 20 years. This is a different world. He really left his hometown and came to a different world, a completely strange world. Don't panic. Don't panic. Syada kept repeating in his heart, but the instinct of the body could not be suppressed like this. It doesn't matter, I will be familiar with all this, and I will blend in here. He kept telling himself desperately, but his body still involuntarily leaned back against the door, his back was already wet. Suddenly, the woman's murmured voice sounded again, although it was also a voice from another world. It seemed to bring Syadela back to reality and let him face all this. The whispering voice declared like reciting a poem, "You have obtained enlightenment." The beating speed of the heart slowed down because of the sound, and the high blood pressure gradually returned to normal because of the whisper. The sound echoed in the heart. What enlightenment? It's not that he didn't hear clearly, it's just that he didn't understand the meaning of this sentence. Enlightenment also belonged to the four elements of the transcendent that the detective vaguely mentioned before his death, but Syada needed further explanation. He is now fully sure that what is in his head is definitely not a system, and that voice is very likely to be a part of the world's mysterious system. You are me, I am you. Stranger, you manipulate the direction of fate in front of the screen, and fate unfolds because of you. I touch the reality of the world behind the screen, and you are strong because of me. Even if you are suspicious, we are one, we are not different. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. The woman's voice answered irrelevant questions, but Syada was not angry, but rather happy. His guess was right. In the extraordinary system of this world, the voice in his head is most likely to be a part of contacting and using the mystery. The world view of this world seems to be a bit close to Thulhu and agnosticism. Extraordinary and mysterious have power, and existence itself will affect mortal things, so another power is needed to help mortals get in touch with those weird and dangerous things. You are me, and I am you. Although I say this, you are definitely different from ordinary situations. He wanted to verify his thoughts with the whispering voice in his head, but all he got was the woman's chuckle. In any case, he has at least come into contact with the extraordinary elements of this world, even if he doesn't understand anything, but at least he stands here and has his own goals. The panic just now subsided gradually, as if he was getting closer to this era of steam filled with smoke. The down-to-earth feeling made Seata more calm, and he told himself to gradually accept all of this instead of useless panic, earn a commission, investigate Hamilton's story, gather the 4 elements, study the voice in your head. Go forward, don't panic. Repeatedly in my heart, I finally let my back leave the door. Giving up the idea of going back to change clothes, Seata carefully walked down the 3 steps at the door, came to the street on the edge of the square, stood still, and looked up at the world with his eyes wide open in the crowd. And let the world reflect in his eyes, anyway, move on. He said in his heart. After a short pause, according to the plan in the house, he walked along the circular street around the square, and walked towards the entrance of the street that left the square on the other side. When you leave the house and come to the street, you really enter the world. Compared with the hustle and bustle of the city, Seata, who walked into it, was as inconspicuous as a drop of water flowing into the sea. He seldom spoke, just walked towards the destination Lark Club. Walk and listen along the way, learn about the world, the city, and everything around you. To put it simply, this world is a bit like the steam revolution of the 19th century in the past world, but compared with the past world, the steam industry here is more prosperous, and there is a lot of people who follow the road of steam without turning. Feel. While harmful black mist is sprayed from the chimneys of factories, all kinds of weird inventions are also created, and the economy is taking off with the development of productivity. Just as Seata guessed, the city he is currently in is Tobesk City, the capital of the northern kingdom of Delarion. This is the pearl of the northern part of the continent, the gathering point of human civilization, and the essence of the times. A big city naturally has to look like a big city. Although limited by the shackles of the times, when you leave the street and enter the alley, you will inevitably encounter feces and garbage dumps, but the appearance of a big city is still reflected in the short journey of 1 hour. Into Shad's eyes. Fortunately, the Lark Club is not far from the city center. If it spans the entire city, Seata might not be able to reach it in the middle of the night. The key point is that Seata has no money to ride in a carriage. Along the way, he also obtained more information about the world from the perspective of a bystander. The most important thing is to know the currency system. At least in the current country, the common currency is divided into gold pounds, shillings, and pence, of which 1 pound equals 20 shillings, and 1 shilling equals 12 pence. Of course, this kind of name is very similar to British currency, not because it is exactly similar, but because Shade translated the names of 3 different currencies from foreign languages into familiar names. After all, the conversion method of values is really similar. The unfortunate fact is that the note with the number 10 on it that Shard found was worth 10p. With the current purchasing power, this is not even enough for him to take a carriage from his own door to the club's door. But if he lived frugally and used 10 pence to buy the cheapest bread crumbs at the bakery that was about to close in the evening, competing with the children and housewives in the slums, he could at least guarantee that he would not starve to death within 3 days. At least now is an era of peace. As one of the largest kingdoms of human beings, the kingdom of Delarion has local conflicts with another powerful kingdom in the south, the United Kingdom of Carson Rick, but relatively speaking, this is an era of peace and development. Is the era of progress, the luck is not bad. Seata is very good at comforting himself. The world is temporarily peaceful, and the Kingdom of Delarion in the north of the Old Continent and the United Kingdom of Carson Rick in the south have almost divided the world. Total war ended decades ago, and while the tide is still simmering, it is at least a sign of peace. The club culture seems to be a special culture of this era. Shade learned from the investigation report that the investigated mistress, Mrs. La Soya, would visit the Lark Club every weekend and would stay here for at least 3 hours. Detective Hamilton's report guessed that this was the place where Mrs. La Soya had a tryst with Mr. Lawrence, because every time Mrs. La Soya appeared in the club, Mr. Lawrence would definitely enter. This is a private club with members. Shade did not have a permit to enter, so after turning into Valenti pedestrian street at the intersection of the street, he stopped and observed at the entrance of the newspaper office opposite the club according to the records in the investigation report. That was the newspaper office to which the Tobesk City Evening News belonged, and it was said that the royal family also had a shareholding. Saturday is the busiest time for newspapers, because Saturday is the usual time for the King's speech and parliamentary reports. At this time, a group of people would gather at the gate of the newspaper office, waiting for the delivery of new news. Of course, the full-time reporters had already set off, and those who stayed at the gate of the newspaper office were all people waiting to try their luck. Syada's plan was to get mixed up in it. Although it was already noon, that mistress, La Soya, usually wouldn't show up at the club in the morning. So if he is lucky, he will soon find the target appearing. As long as the woman's appearance time and departure time are recorded, the report is complete. To complete this matter so easily made Syada feel unreal. But after all, Hamilton has almost completed everything, so this is actually one of the legacy left by the dead gentleman. Syada was holding a pocket watch belonging to one of Mr. Hamilton's estates, so when he stood by the mailbox at the entrance of the newspaper office, pretending to be waiting for someone to look around for a long time, he finally saw the target appear, and immediately caught up with him in the report. The black and white photos were compared repeatedly. Confirmed and recorded 1:23, which was the time when Mistress La Soya appeared. The lady was stylishly dressed, with lace trim on the skirt and jeweled hair accessories that were clearly expensive. She arrived directly at the entrance of the club by taking a carriage. Even though the weather was gloomy, she still held a cloth umbrella. The age is about 30 years old, the height is average but the figure is plump. Although the powder on the face is a bit thick, it can be seen that she is also a beauty. Because he was worried about being discovered, Syada also knew that he had no tracking experience, so after confirming that he was the target, he immediately looked away. "Look at her ring." "What?" The murmuring voice of a woman in his mind reappeared. Although Syada didn't know what she was, he still turned his attention to Mrs. La Soya. At this time, the doorman of the club was already greeting, and when the woman turned around, Syada clearly saw the ring. Strangely enough, the ring was set with neither a gemstone nor a diamond, but instead looked like a small pebble. Of course, since he was observing from across the street, pedestrians on the street would occasionally block his view, so he wasn't sure if he had lost his sight. Madame La Soya also quickly entered the club, and did not give Syada many opportunities to observe. "What do you mean? Why did you draw my attention to that ring?" he asked the voice in his head again, but the murmur did not actively sound because of his inquiry. This annoyed Syada a little, but he knew to control his emotions. He was not the kind of person who gets angry easily. "Sir, what time is it? I was thinking about something when I suddenly heard someone talking beside me." Syada was startled, thinking that he was standing by the mailbox and wantonly looking at the door of the club on the other side of the street was too conspicuous, but only when he heard the voice did he realize that someone was asking for the time. "Sorry, I forgot my pocket watch." The one who explained his rash asking behavior was a middle-aged gentleman in his 40s who seemed quite elegant and easygoing. He was wearing a black silk hat, a formal suit and a white shirt that looked like he was going to a party. The face is a bit broad, with a neat mustache on the chin, and the blue eyes are very attractive. The middle-aged man smiled at Syada, who hesitated for a moment, and took out the pocket watch that had just been put in the right pocket of his jacket. 1:30. He said, and he was a little curious about the reason why the middle-aged man appeared here. This attire did not look like a reporter waiting for news at all, but Syada's attire with a notebook between his hands. As if hearing Syada's heart, the middle-aged gentleman said with a smile, "Thank you for your time. I have an appointment with the editor-in-chief of the newspaper. I didn't bring a pocket watch. I thought I was going to be late. Now it seems just right." As he spoke, he handed out his business card. Syada took it politely, and handed out his own business card as well. In fact, it was the business card of the dead Mr. Hamilton, with the address and business scope of the detective agency on it, and the name only read Detective Hamilton without a prefix. Since Shard had chosen Hamilton as his surname, he could of course use these business cards. He is glad that there is no household registration system at all, and he doesn't even need to forge identity documents. A middle-aged man named Bill Schneider runs a private psychological clinic. Different from Syada's current occupation, which is not yet stable, Schneider's psychological clinic is quite formal, and the income of the psychological clinic is obviously more than that of detectives like Syada who rely on inheritance to conduct the first investigation. The evidence is that Syada's business card is shabby compared to the doctor's business card, and the other party's business card is much better in terms of paper and printing. "If you need anything, you can find me here," Mr. Schneider said very kindly, and he pointed to the address of the clinic on the business card, which was the address in the eastern district of Tobesk. "My treatment is broad." He looked at Syada. Syada was actually had a creepy illusion of being seen through by those blue eyes. "Including schizophrenia." The psychiatrist said kindly that he was good at communicating with strangers. "What?" Syada was stunned, but before asking, Mr. Bill Schneider quickly changed the subject. "Speaking of which, Mr. Detective, have you ever considered receiving adult education?" Correspondence. UU reading www.uuganshu.com. Adult education by correspondence. The topic changed too quickly, and Syada didn't keep up with his train of thought. "I have no plans to study psychology for the time being." He took the other party as an enthusiastic graduate of a certain psychology specialist school. But Syada refused, and the doctor didn't bother. "Well then, goodbye." The doctor nodded to the detective, put the detective's business card in his pocket, and then turned and walked towards the courtyard of the newspaper office. Correspondence. Speaking of which, what does that Dr. Schneider mean by mentioning schizophrenia? Syada stood there thinking silently, and then realized that he heard the voice in his head, which seemed to be very similar to the so-called schizophrenia. "You don't have to laugh in my head. I admit that your laugh is very nice and charming. You are definitely not a product of my schizophrenia," Shad said to the voice in his head. "Although I am sure, my situation belongs to contact with mystery, and it is definitely not schizophrenia." But what he wasn't sure about was what the psychiatrist he met by chance saw. "I just went out, and I met this kind of person who may be involved in extraordinary power. Is it too bad luck? Or is the density of extraordinary people in this world higher than I thought? Or, this psychiatrist just mentioned it casually. Thinking too much?" Thinking in his heart, Syada carefully put away Dr. Schneider's business card. "In any case, the entrustment is the most important right now. Now that I know the address of the psychiatrist, I can go there anytime." At least from the brief exchange just now, Dr. Schneider doesn't seem to be hostile. However, the short-term communication did not reveal the real thoughts, and Syada still wanted to understand the world a little bit, and then communicate with people in depth. "Isn't it really my bad luck?" Syada speculated in his heart about the chance encounter with Dr. Schneider just now, but fortunately, the sound of his stomach rumbling brought him back to reality, and now the commission is really the most important thing. Less than 12 hours before crossing, Syada must learn to endure hunger. If he traveled through the forest, he might have a chance to hunt, and if it was an era of chaos, he might also have a chance to get food. But it is such a big city with order. If you want to fill your stomach, you must abide by the order. Syada stood at the entrance of the newspaper office and looked at the clubs where the upper class entered and exited not far away, expecting the feeling of hunger to pass. Fortunately, he just needs to stand and wait now. If he needs to pursue him, he really has nothing to do. I've never heard of a traveler who would go hungry. He whispered in his heart, wanting to blame himself for his incompetence. But after thinking about it, there was nothing he could do about the current situation. He could only hope that the lady would show up quickly so that he could submit a report to his employer. Standing there thinking about something, someone handed over a flyer, and Syada just took it. Looking up, he saw a smiling missionary with a round face, wearing a priestly white robe, with the holy emblem of the church on his left chest, and a black pendant hanging on his chest, distributing papers to the nearby crowd. Although this neighborhood is not as prosperous as the St. Teresa Square where Shade currently lives, it is also an important avenue in the central part of the city, so it is appropriate for the missionaries to choose to distribute leaflets here. Looking down, what was stuffed into his hand was the church propaganda belonging to the Church of War and Peace. When Syada was rummaging through the house, he learned about the state of belief in this world and knew that this was one of the Orthodox churches. In the past era of this world, there were quite a lot of stories about gods, but in the current era, only 5 gods are officially recognized by the government and the people. Therefore, the mainstream belief in the world is these 5 righteous gods. Father of Peace, also known as God of War and Peace, the holy emblem is a white dove with light grey wings. Mr. Liming, also known as God of Light and Shadow, his holy emblem is a notched ring, brass in color. The Old Man with the Lamp, also known as God of the Sun and the Earth, his holy emblem is the sun pattern, golden yellow. Ms. Creation, also known as God of Creation and Destruction, her holy emblem is a wrench, silver in color. Lord of all things, also known as God of Nature and Evil Thoughts, his holy emblem is 2 overlapping leaves, one withered yellow and one green. The old man who transported the corpse not long ago was a member of the Natural Church. Hey? Why are the priesthoods promoted by the righteous gods all relative concepts? Thinking of this, Syada suddenly had more thoughts about this world. But that kind of inexplicable feeling can't be better expressed to myself. Some kind of power seemed to be touched in the blur, and a whisper sounded in the ear, "You feel a miracle. This time it is a miracle of one of the 4 elements." So far, Syada has come into contact with all of them except blasphemy. According to the information mentioned by the voice in my mind, it seems that only by touching the complete 4 elements can one be qualified to touch the mystery and open the door of the extraordinary. It seems to be easier than I thought. It only took me half a day to get 3/4 of it. So the woman's laughter sounded again in my head. It was really beautiful. The 5 Orthodox churches are not hostile to each other, and their relationship with each other is at least much better than the relationship between human kingdoms. Churches vary in strength in different regions, but in Tobesk, the Pearl of the North, all 5 churches exist, and there is relatively friendly competition with each other. Syada thought about these things, looked at the printed matter in his hand, and sighed that the printing machine did not need to be invented by himself. Although the printing quality is not very high, but at least. I stared and suddenly found important information. Most of the leaflets introduced the teachings of the righteous God Father of Peace, and welcomed believers and pagans to go to the church to listen to the weekly scheduled lectures and sermons. What is important is that it is written at the bottom of the paper that if you hold this leaflet and line up at the gate of the church at 5:30 p.m. on weekends, you can receive free relief food. And it was written in a line of small characters, no matter how long the line is, as long as you show up before 6 o'clock, you will definitely be able to get a number plate and food. Even if it is embarrassing to go to receive this relief food, at least let Syada know that he will definitely not starve to death today. He rubbed his nose, wrote down the church address of the Church of Victory and Peace, and then solemnly folded the leaflet with a strong ink smell, and put it in Mr. Hamilton's notepad. I thanked that in a low voice in my heart. After all, it is a world where transcendence seems to exist, so it is better to be cautious. Although the feeling of hunger still hasn't subsided, at least my mood is much better. Luck is actually not too bad. Seata thought in his heart, knowing that once Mrs. La Soya under investigation entered the club, she would not come out within an hour or two, so he wondered if he could talk to the missionary. Belief in God is universal in this world, but atheists are a minority among the minority. Of course, as long as you don't publicly yell that you don't trust God, it's fine, but Seata intends to learn more about these so-called righteous gods. In a world of faith, ignorance of these things is all the more dangerous. He was still thinking about how to strike up a conversation with the other party, but the missionary had already walked away. I was very sorry in my heart, but I didn't catch up, but continued to stand there and wait. After all, when I got a firm foothold, I had plenty of time to understand all this. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. There are actually quite a few people like him standing at the gate of the newspaper. Most of them are reporters waiting for new news, and a few are idlers working for the newspaper. Today is Saturday, even though the weather is foggy. Valenti Pedestrian Street as the main road is very lively, so it is not surprising that so many people stand here. Although it is called a pedestrian street, horse-drawn carriages are not prohibited. While observing the club, Seata looked at the passing pedestrians and carriages. He thought that this would help him better integrate into the place. There was a burning smell in the air, which of course was smog. But the smell wasn't very strong, just a mist that hung in the air, thickening as the sun moved westward from overhead. Seata was worried about his physical condition, and in his wild thoughts, he saw another carriage parked at the entrance of the club. Immediately looking up, it turned out to be Mr. Lawrence, the client's husband. Interesting, windfall. He whispered, write down the current time, and write the information in the notebook. The client, Mrs. Lawrence, spent a lot of money. If her husband and his lover were caught having a tryst at the club on the day of submitting the report, she might be able to pay an extra reward. But it's also possible that the angry woman implicated me. Seata thought wildly in his heart, hoping to see Mrs. La Soya welcoming Mr. Lawrence at the door of the club, but unfortunately Mr. Lawrence walked into the club by himself. Even though it was a street away, Shad could see the smile and excitement on Mr. Lawrence's face. He definitely didn't come to the club to play cards or drink tea. Good luck, he said in his heart, shaking his head, and recorded Mr. Lawrence's clothes in detail today to prove the authenticity of his report. If this business goes well, maybe I can really try and stay here as a detective. Wait until life is stable before contacting Ko Fan, and try to find hope of returning home. Watching the leisure at the entrance of the club, Seata couldn't help sighing when the outsider thought of his hometown far away. He estimated the time again. Since Mr. Lawrence has also entered the club, it is impossible for the two of them to come out within an hour. They have something to do. Should I find a place to rest? Thinking in his heart, he looked around, and then he saw a tavern called Screaming Hound at the corner of the street. This kind of tavern opened on the main road and opened during the day is usually not particularly chaotic, especially now it is only 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Seata pinched the 10-pence bill in his pocket, licked his chapped lips, confirmed the current time, hesitated for a moment, and then walked over. Pushing open the door of the tavern, the first thing I saw was a row of gas lamps on the wall, illuminating the dim interior. There was a mixed smell of alcohol and fermented food in the air, which made him a little uncomfortable while he was still hungry. Seata now knows that the lamps used in this era are all gas lamps. As for those climbing on the walls, in addition to the gas pipes, there are usually steam pipes. The gas pipes are slightly thinner, and the steam pipes are covered with heat insulation. The round wooden tables in the tavern are all empty. There are only 3 customers sitting around a wooden table away from the bar and against the wall to play cards. On the wall beside the table is a picture of a snow mountain landscape oil painting. Those were 3 men who didn't look rich. Although there were no patches on the clothes, the dark clothes were all washed white, and the hats on the table had obviously been used for a long time, and they were wrinkled and piled up together. Maybe they just wanted to take a rest on this leisurely summer afternoon. Shade didn't bother, and walked to the bar where the bartender was standing, thinking he was just buying a glass of ice water. But I heard one of the people playing cards cheering, "This time I won again." The middle-aged man with a beard and messy hair stood up, and threw the cards in his hand on the table with great air. "Look, it's exactly 21 o'clock. As he spoke, he looked around triumphantly, but it was a pity that there was only him and his friends here. Seeing Xiao, who just walked in the door, his eyes lit up. "Give this gentleman a glass of rye." The man who won the card but is not rich said to the bartender. Xiao turned around to look at him in surprise, and then nodded slightly to express his gratitude. "Thanks for the kindness, but I think a glass of ice water would suffice." He is not good at drinking, and he doesn't know the degree of the so-called rye wine, and he is still performing detective activities, so there is no need to be contaminated with alcohol. Obviously, the price of a glass of water is much lower than that of a glass of wine. The three men thought that Xiao was saving money for them, and they immediately took a liking to him. Seeing that Xiao had no companions, he invited him to play cards together. But Xiao didn't know how to play, he could only watch them play from the sidelines, and the men also enthusiastically taught Xiao the Lord card skills. The playing cards in this world are very similar to the playing cards in the previous life. There are also 4 suits, a total of 54 cards, except that the 4 suits are the sun, the moon, the stars, and the flowers. The mainstream method of playing cards is a rule similar to 21 points, which is called Rhodes card. The inventor of the gameplay is Rhodes. Playing cards are generally made in such a way that the front is a picture, and the suit and number are marked in the upper left corner and upper right corner. Therefore, some series of playing cards with special patterns issued in special times are extremely valuable. Only 1,000 sets of Rhodes cards were released in a special series recently released, and the name is Fairy Tale Series. The 3 men playing cards are not rich, and they don't know much about the so-called special series of Rhodes cards, so they can only give a general idea. They only know that some nobles are crazy about those rare cards. In particular, some cards not only have special card patterns, but even contain special game rules. Those cards were priceless. It was rumored that a special card was sold at Ford's auction house last year for £12,000. Xiao secretly calculated the prices, and thought about the Sun 3 in the diary. He didn't want to laugh, but deeply doubted whether the card he inherited was genuine. But if the card on which the woman sits sideways and holds up the silver moon card is genuine, his last worry about his future life will disappear. After chatting with 3 men playing cards in the tavern for an hour, Xiao got up to leave. When I returned to the entrance of the newspaper office, the place next to the mailbox was occupied by a young man in a brown vest and glasses. This was probably a real reporter, so the young detective changed to stand beside the lamppost of the Black Iron. The street lamp is generally regarded as a cylinder, and it also uses gas as an energy source. Xiao was standing by the side leisurely, but his eyes accidentally saw the nameplate. The nameplate clearly states that you must never smoke under a lamppost, or you will do so at your own peril. Xiao imagined what might happen, and subconsciously stayed away from this dangerous place. The sun was gradually setting to the west, and Shad had been waiting patiently. After the feeling of hunger reached the limit and disappeared in the afternoon, the body obviously felt much better. He planned to wait until around 5 o'clock, and if Mrs. La Soya didn't show up, he would go to the Church of War and Peace Church to receive relief food. By the way, you can also take a look at what is going on with the church in this world. Yu reads www.yuyuganshu.com to confirm whether the church has extraordinary power. However, I have that voice in my head, I won't be arrested right after entering, right? And the secrets of outsiders. He is also a little worried about this, but without knowing anything about the situation, there are actually not many choices that Xiao can make. Perhaps because he noticed that Xiao thought of her again, the female voice in his mind sounded again, "Look at his ring." This sentence appeared at noon, but then the personal pronoun was female, but this time it was male. Syada immediately looked up at the door of the club, and sure enough, he saw a young man walking out with a suitcase. On the finger of his right hand was the white pebble ring that he saw on Mrs. La Soya's finger at noon. Because the shape is too unique, Syada believes that he will not admit his mistake. Both of them put the ring on the of their right hand, and the voice in their heads made no further prompts. It's really interesting, why did the owner of the ring change? Syada thought in his heart. After seeing the man with the ring leave the club, he did not look for an empty carriage, but mixed into the evening crowd, behind a fat man with a briefcase in a hurry, along the street towards the east go. The fog in the steam city obscured his figure. If he didn't chase, Syada would soon lose the man's whereabouts. Should I catch up? The voice in my head must not be talking nonsense. Thinking in his mind, he turned around to avoid the direction of the club entrance, unfolded the map in his notebook by Onyangth, and looked for the direction of the Church of War and Peace. The church where the relief food is distributed is in the east of the current location, and it is now very close to 5 o'clock. Very well, since the direction and time are right, let's catch up. If you can't catch up, go directly to the church. In short, you can't go hungry on the first day of the new world. I can't think like this, otherwise I feel a little pitiful. With such a simple thought in mind, Syada took his things and set off along the low wall by the street, chasing the man forward. In order to prevent being discovered, although the fog lingering in the city became thicker as evening came, Syada still didn't dare to follow closely. He's self-aware enough to know he doesn't have the skills to stalk people. As a matter of course, after 10 minutes, when they turned around the back wall of a milk distribution company and entered the alley, Syada completely lost track of the man. How should I say, I lost it as expected. Standing in the alley and looking around blankly, confirming that he really lost his target, he shook his head and gave up continuing to search. I didn't continue to dwell on this matter. Since I lost my follower, I went to receive the relief food, but where is this place? In a completely unfamiliar city, avoiding being discovered while following others, Syada didn't have time to remember his own course of action, only knowing that he was now in a narrow alley with a very bad smell. On the left is the facade of a milk distribution company, and on the right is the side wall of a 3-story apartment building. On the walls on both sides, in addition to the rusty pipes climbing to connect different directions, there are also layers of dirty words and graffiti, and there are garbage and feces everywhere under the walls. Only near the entrance of the alley, there are 2 or 3 rusty large-caliber steam pipes piled up. It is unknown who abandoned them here. Go and see the name of the milk delivery company and find the current location on the map. When Syada had an idea, he no longer cared about the person he wanted to follow. Turn around and go back the same way along the alley, being careful not to step on the indescribable filth in the alley. When he was about to walk out of the alley, he carefully avoided it, because a group of police officers in police uniforms hurried past on the street in front of him. Among them, the tall middle-aged man with stubble on his face at the end of the line even glanced at Syada. Syada also looked at the man with innocent eyes, so the police officer ignored Syada. Did something happen over there? Syada stood at the entrance of the alley, looking towards the direction where the police were running. Because I don't know which street this is, I have no way of identifying what is in that direction of the street. None of my business, he said in a low voice, and walked towards the door of the milk distribution company with a notepad in his hands. This is not a factory, but an office building of the distribution department. The yard is surrounded by a small yellow building with 2 floors, and an old dog that looks a little old is lying on the door. The dog also took a look at Syada, who was close to here, and saw that Syada just stopped at the door and did not come in, so he stood up lazily, changed to a position where the setting sun could see it, and lay down on his stomach. The name of the milk delivery company is Silver Parrot, a strange name, but it does exist on the map, and the former detective also marked that a murder happened here 3 years ago. The murder case had nothing to do with Syada. He walked forward with a quarter-expanded map while constantly confirming that his position was correct. There are not many pedestrians on the street, and you will not bump into people when you walk with your head down. Unknowingly, in the sunset and dense fog, I walked along the direction of the pipe with white steam emitting from the wall, and came to the end of the street. There is a 5-fork road in front of you. According to the map, if you walk diagonally to the left with the dessert shop, the distance will probably be shorter. But the intersection was almost blocked by crowds at this time, and there was a silverware store near the mailbox on the east side. The signboard was scrubbed clean, but something seemed to have happened there. The team of police officers that Seota saw at the entrance of the alley just now was maintaining order and preventing people from approaching. While stopping to observe, more carriages came from behind Seota and other intersections, and more policemen appeared here in just a few minutes. Even some people who looked like school scholars stepped out of the carriage, not knowing what to do. Seota didn't want to join in the fun at first, and now the food relief is the most important thing. But because there were too many people joining in the fun, he was pushed to the front of the crowd unknowingly while trying to pass the intersection. Want to back off, but the people behind won't do it. The police in front kept yelling for people to disperse. There is nothing worth seeing here. Probably seeing Seota being squeezed over, he didn't intend to get close. The young police officer who kept order with a pen in his breast pocket kindly reminded him to be careful of thieves. This made Seota a little nervous, and subconsciously touched the 10-pence note in his pocket. After confirming that it was still there, from the corner of the eye, another team of police officers with guns escorted 3 men in plain clothes into the silverware store. The tallest man among them was extremely strong, and the young man walking in the middle had the aura of a scholar. The last man made Shad feel familiar. He seemed to be the missionary who handed him leaflets in the afternoon. Are missionaries in this world still working part-time in the police force? He thought of a conclusion that he didn't believe, and he held the coins and pocket watch in his pocket tightly, planning to leave here quickly, otherwise he would be late. The moment he turned around and wanted to squeeze back, a strange warning suddenly came from his heart. Before I understood the reason for this feeling, I heard a voice boom. The explosion was beyond everyone's expectations, and the sound of almost tearing the eardrums caused the crowd to burst into screams. Although the flames could not be seen, the glass windows of the silverware store shattered immediately, and the wall seemed to be skewed, causing the metal pipes on the wall to make a harsh metal twisting sound. Fortunately, the police did not keep the crowd around the store door, so when the panicked shouts sounded, no one was injured. The crowd immediately dispersed like a flood. Standing in front of the crowd, Seota remained calm and wanted to leave. He saw a brown-haired middle-aged man running towards the door of the silverware shop. "I'm a reporter. I'm a reporter. What's going on here?" He grabbed the notebook with one hand and waved his ID card with the other. He rushed to this side more excitedly than anyone else, and was grabbed by the young policeman neatly. "Gas pipe exploded, sir, please stay away." After hearing this conclusion, Seota couldn't believe it at all. How could the gas pipe explode? Boom! Another almost heart-stopping explosion sounded in the silverware shop, and the oscillating air almost had the force to push people. This time even the glass on the second floor of the silverware store was broken, and the police who maintained order had to flee temporarily due to the falling glass shards. While retreating, Seota saw through the window that on the second floor of the explosion, there seemed to be 2 people fighting in a white mist, and there seemed to be light on one of them's fists. The distance is a bit too far, and the fog that comes with the sunset is also reducing the field of vision, so Seota can't see very clearly. Extraordinary, he thought. Yes. The woman's voice startled Seota, but knowing that the other party would not explain further, he left the place quickly without asking. The 3 people just now are definitely members of the church, and this kind of thing happened after they entered. Sure enough, the church in this world has a high probability of being an extraordinary force, and it seems to be closely integrated with the order of the kingdom. In this way, the probability that the Orthodox Church can be trusted has greatly increased. I don't know if I have a chance, through the channel of the Church. Now there are two choices, not only the psychiatrist, but also the 5 churches in this city, which also have the opportunity for Seata to get in touch with Keopham and figure out the voice in his head. However, how did it happen that I ran into this kind of thing? He followed the dispersed crowd and walked in the original direction, while the female voice in his mind said the sentence he had already said, "Look at his ring." Although he still doesn't know what the woman's voice is in his head, at least Seata knows that the other party has no obvious malice. Immediately listening to the voice and looking around, I saw the young man wearing a pebble ring and carrying a suitcase again. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com is walking not far ahead. Such a coincidence. No matter how I think about it, I know it can't be such a coincidence. Wait, the explosion just now has nothing to do with him, right? How could I have such an idea, and there is no evidence now? With this thought, Seata didn't want to follow him anymore. If the opponent was able to create an explosion with bare hands like the two in the silverware store, he followed the opponent almost equivalent to trying to replicate the tragic end of the former detective. No. Seata slowed down his pace, wanting to let the opponent disappear naturally into the distance of his vision. Unexpectedly, the young man also stopped, took out the map to check it like Seata just now, and then carried the box into the alley next to him. To follow or not to follow? The woman's voice in his head reminded him of the ring 3 times, so he shouldn't be bored. But Shad, who knows almost nothing about the world, must also ensure the necessary caution. He walked forward according to his original plan, and when he passed the alley where the young man turned into, he glanced inward naturally, and saw the man turned and disappeared at the corner ahead. To follow or not to follow? He asked himself again, and suddenly realized that the next decision would affect his life for a long time to come. To follow or not to follow? He was asking the woman in his mind. He heard laughter, and heard a whispered answer, "The road of destiny is unfolding in front of you, guest from a foreign land, are you willing to be ordinary, or longing for immortality? The world is like the ocean, do you have the courage to explore the horror beyond the safe island? The path of destiny unfolds in front of you, one leading to the extraordinary, one, chase." Gritting his teeth, Seata leaned against the wall and entered the alley.